both sides of this. If you're walking down the Louvre, it's in the center of the aisle. You see one side and you see the front side. You walk around the back and you see the back side of the same painting. It's brilliantly done. I don't even remember the name of the artist. But David does declare there is a God in Israel. David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied this day. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." Again, David's confidence was not based on anything that was visible with his eyes. David's confidence was not based on anything that was tangible. David's confidence came from his relationship with God. His experience of defeating past enemies with God's help and the anointing of Samuel. In the 16th chapter that we covered last week, after David was anointed by the prophet Samuel, the words were spoken that, "And the Spirit of God dwelled with David powerfully from that day forward." David was not the same David before the anointing. And notice that the anointing is a very private thing. The anointing was in obedience to Samuel, who came to the home of Jesse and sought out the least of the brothers. The anointing happened privately, except for his brothers were there to see it. But the anointing brought power into David's life that David had never known before. I'm sure that that was the primary reason that David walked this path, that David spoke up in front of Goliath and in front of the cowardice armies and troops of Israel, because he had been anointed and God's power was with him. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine. With a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. Yay for the good guy. David becomes one of Saul's officers after this. When Saul realized that David was able to do what no one believed he could do, probably and likely Saul included, especially with a sling and 5 stones instead of an armor and a sword, when David was able to accomplish and everyone saw it, the king decides, this is somebody I need. Maybe doing a little more than just playing the harp and getting my armor for me. So he becomes one of Saul's officers. After King Saul had watched David go out to fight Goliath, Saul turned to the commander of his army and said, "Abner, who is that young man?" "Your Majesty," Abner said, "I swear by your life I don't even know." "Then find out," Saul told him. When David came back from fighting Goliath, he was still carrying Goliath's head. You all know that he cut his head off. So I would imagine that would be a pretty heavy head that he was dragging.